Hello class and welcome to Strategic Management, Chapter 1. Let's get started. In this chapter we're going to cover the elements of strategic planning. But first, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about strategy formulation and why it's important. So when we're developing a strategy for a company, we're looking at developing a set of long-range plans that basically help the organization to be successful for the long run. Okay. Now, strategies come in as it relates to time. Strategies, can be less than a year. They can be between a year and 5 years, or they could be longer than 5 years. Okay. So when it comes to top level management and they're making strategic plans for organizations, they'll typically focus on one of those horizons. And the yearly plans are updated pretty much every year. Maybe the 5-year plans are reviewed every couple of years, right, unless there's a big major disruption in the marketplace. A key component of all these plans is that the organizations are looking at their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So many of you should have heard about the SWOT analysis. We're going to cover that later in this class, and we're going to go through what I call the grown-up version of that, or the larger, more complex mathematical version of the SWOT analysis, which is great for giving presentations to your managers, vice presidents, or people that you need to persuade to come on board and support your strategy. But one thing I want to point out here is that a strategy is nothing more than a plan, or perhaps even a set of plans that are all grafted together. And key components of that plan is that you're looking at the company's strengths and its weaknesses, the things that they do well and the things that they need to improve on. You're outlining those, and then you're mapping those against the opportunities and threats that are in the marketplace. So you're taking a look outside the company as well as inside the company, and you're saying, hey, here's where we can have greater success. Here's where we can introduce new products and capture more market share. Here's where we can earn more money and come closer to meeting our financial goals as a company. And you're matching the strengths and weaknesses of the company, okay, toward those opportunities. And you're looking at ways that you can minimize the various threats towards an organization. This is the core of what strategic formation and strategic planning is all about. Now, when we're first looking at an organization and you're either starting a new company or you're looking at an existing company, there's a couple elements we should all be familiar with. And one is the mission of the company, 2, the vision of the company, and 3, the objectives associated with that company's strategic plan or their planning activities. So 1, the mission of the company tells you why the company is here. What's its purpose for existing? This statement typically is short. It is very broad and very encompassing, and it talks about what we're here to do. Right? What is the purpose or the fundamental purpose for that organization? Now, a vision statement is different. A lot of people get these two mixed up. But a vision statement describes what the company wants to be, what it wants to grow into. Oftentimes it may have a time horizon on it, or it may be open-ended when it comes to the time horizon. But it would say something like, we want to be the #1 provider of cell phones in the cell phone industry. Or we desire to be the most innovative company in the world when it comes to computer technology. So this is our vision statement, where we want to be. We're not there now, but we're on our way. And what we look for is consistency between the company's strategies and the company's vision statement and its mission. Objectives are a little bit different. These are items that are more short-term in nature. They definitely have a target date of when you want to achieve them, and you're going to see them oftentimes attached to a specific plan or set of activities that the organization is doing. So when it comes to strategic planning, you really want to look at, well, what are the objectives that this plan is supposed to accomplish, and then evaluate the various strategic activities to see whether or not they're working towards those set objectives, which should tie into the vision of the company, where they want to go, and the mission of the company, the purpose of that organization is there. When it comes to strategic planning, you could break it down into 4 components, and actually these are the various components that the lecture, this class is structured around. So you have environmental scanning, strategy formulation, strategy implementation, and evaluation and control. Here's a closer look at the outline of the textbook and also the outlines of the lecture for this class. So you can see that we're going to start off with initially talking about environmental scanning. We're going to look at internal and external. So here's where you get your great overview of the SWOT analysis. And we'll talk about how to use that and how to put mathematical numbers behind that, so that you can be more persuasive when you're in meetings and everything, trying to present your ideas and strategies to individuals. The next section here is strategy. Now, in the strategy, we're actually looking at specific activities that we're recommending the company does to achieve the goals and objectives that are outlined in the overall plan. Now, when we're in this stage in the class, we're going to talk about specific strategies, what we call generic strategies. These are strategies that can be implemented in theory without any regard to the industry, the size of the company. These are generic strategies. We're going to cover a number of those. Now, even though the strategies are generic in terms of the word that we're using, they still need to be customized to each particular company. And just because you execute a particular strategy doesn't mean it's going to work. So you have to really look at that strategy and make sure it matches with your strengths and weaknesses as a company. The next thing we're going to talk about in the class will be strategy implementation. So once I have a great plan, how do I do it? How do I implement it? How do I put it in place? And I can tell you one thing, you can have the best plan in the world, but if you don't know how to put it into action, if you don't know how to set up programs, budgets, procedures, motivate employees to follow and execute that plan, you're still going to be at step number 0. Okay, you're not going to have the success that you need. So strategy implementation is a big part of it. The last step here is evaluation and control. I oftentimes refer to this component as, the forgotten one, or the stepchild of strategic planning. However, I would argue that it's one of the most important, it's one of the most critical. Let's say you made it through all the other 3 steps. You did your scanning, you did your research, you understand the company in and out, you understand the opportunities and threats, then you put together a great strategy, a great plan to help you implement and take advantage of those opportunities and reduce and minimize those threats. And then you went a step further and you actually implemented it. You created programs and procedures and policies, you motivated employees, and they're out executing against your strategy. Well, here's the big question. How do you know your strategy is working? How do you know that your strategy is actually hitting the results and the targets that you expected? Well, that's where evaluation and control comes in. You have to understand what the performance is, be able to measure it, and then compare that back against some set of standards that you identified at the beginning of your strategic planning phase. And then, if you find out that it's working, great, keep going. If you find out that there's a problem and you're not being successful, then you know what you need to do? You need to implement corrective actions. And oftentimes, you should think of those corrective actions before you actually get to the point where you have poor performance. So let's take a closer look at each of these 3 elements. Environmental scanning involves the monitoring, evaluating, and the sharing of information throughout the entire company. You get information from inside the company and you get information from outside the company. So we call this internal and external. And it's very important that organizations conduct this information. One of the departments that's most responsible for collecting information that's useful to the company is your marketing research department. They are tasked very often with understanding the customers, understanding clients, understanding what's going on out in the marketplace, the new trends, the new demands that are out there, understanding the competition, drafting those reports and feeding them back into the organization to help develop sound strategies and strategic planning. Okay. Likewise, every department in the organization does some form of market research or external data gathering. Let's say you're in the IT industry. You should be keeping the IT department. You should be keeping your finger on what's going on in terms of the world of IT and how that would affect your company. Maybe there's new software programs that you need to consider implementing. Maybe there's new databases that are out that will help you operate your company's website more efficiently. So this idea of external scanning, looking out into the world outside of your company and finding information that's valuable and useful and driving that information back into the organization is key, is fundamental to success. And it goes not only across the marketing department, but across every department in the organization. Now here's a slide that's very important. I can't stress the importance of this slide when it comes to this chapter 1, and your exams. This slide basically breaks down environmental scanning into 3 different components. You have the society environment, the task environment, and the internal environment. I want to point out that the societal and the task environment are both external to the company. If you look at the items that are within that, within those various concentric circles, you'll see that they are all outside the organization. Now what's important to note here is the level of control or influence that the organization has over the elements that are in the various concentric circles. So let's take a look at the societal environment. You have in here social, cultural, economic forces, technological forces, political, legal forces. These are huge macro forces that basically no organization, no single organization has any control or influence over. So these trends are happening, they're going to happen, and there's very little you can do about it. So when it comes to strategic planning, you need to understand these trends and develop your strategy in a way to help you capitalize on them or survive if the change is something that's difficult to your organization. Let's take technological forces. When the internet began to really get going, there were some companies that were resistant to it. Well, guess what? That was a technological force that was going to happen whether organizations liked it or not. And no matter how much they could resist it or try to market against it or do something to try to slow it down, it just wasn't going to work. This is a large macro phenomenon that's taking place. So the best thing you can do as far as strategic planning is understand that change, that trend, and figure out how to create a strategy to make you successful within it. So let's talk about the task environment. The task environment refers to entities or organizations that are a bit closer to your company. And in this level, you have some or moderate levels of influence. So you can't control them all. But what you can do is you can influence them. So in this category, we have suppliers, competitors, trade unions, creditors, customers, special interest groups. And you can see no company has complete control over any of these different agencies, so to speak. But what you can do is influence them. I could put together a great marketing campaign to influence my customers and say, hey, these are the products and features that you want in the next version of our product. And I can market that and try to influence their demand. Suppliers, I can get into negotiations. Walmart is a great company that does this. I can negotiate with my suppliers to help drive down my costs or to help put in place logistical procedures that help minimize the amount of churn or mistakes that are made in our distribution networks. So I can't control them, but I really can influence them. And that's what the task environment is all about. The next level here we have is internal. An internal environment is where the organization has its most control. These refer to your employees, the culture within your company, the resources you have within your organization, and the structure, how you choose to set your organizational structure up. These are things that top management has complete control of within the organization, or I should say they have extremely strong ability to influence it. So when you're writing your plan, your strategy, and you're doing your environmental scanning, it's very important that you identify what items do you have control over that you can influence and what items that you can't, and the level upon which that you can or can't influence them. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is strategy formulation. When it comes to forming strategies, it's important to note that they're formed at every level in the organization, okay, whether it is top management, middle management, or lower level management. Strategies are formed at each level. Now, the purpose, the function, and the company-wide effect of those strategies will differ. So strategic planning, which is at the very top level of the organization, we're talking about your top level management here, is where the bulk of this class focuses at. We're focused in this class on strategic level decisions that affect the entire organization. These are strategies that are laid out that are often then pushed down or trickled down throughout the organization in order to drive overall success for the company. Middle management typically focuses on tactical decisions. I want to define middle management for you as, say, an individual who's been out in the workforce for 5 to 10 years and they've made it to a job where they're making 6 figures or better, or someone's coming into the workforce with an MBA and they have 5 to 6 years of work experience and they're getting that great $100,000 job. They may be in charge of a product, or they may be, working in a department where they have significant influence over, some of the strategic directions of the company, but it only it reflects that department. It only affects that department, not the entire organization. So, for example, someone who may be a brand manager for Kellogg's, and the decisions that they make and the plans and strategies they create affect their particular brand, say the Tony the Tiger brand that they're in charge of. But it doesn't affect any of the other brands in the company. That's a level that's referred to as middle management. Okay, and they focus a lot on developing procedures and policies that must be followed. Policies are procedures that must be followed. And then the lowest level, or what we call the operational level of the organization, is your lower level management. These are the people who are the closest to the customers. You could think of these guys as the feet on the street. So if I went into, say, Walmart, and I'm looking at who's the manager of the technology department or section, who's the manager of the men's clothing section, and they have to set strategies for how they're going to run their departments in that local store. So the decisions they're making only affect pretty much their immediate team and those that report directly to them. But the customer also feels that probably the greatest. Why? Because they're the closest to the company. So planning on all three levels is important. The breadth of what they affect differs though. And in this course, we're focusing primarily on strategic management. Let's talk about strategy implementation. Now, it's important to know that once you have strategies that are formed by top-level management, they get pushed down to middle-level management. We call this trickle-down management, right? So the strategy is to grow our market share by 12% within the next 12 months, okay? Now, the marketing department, the IT department, the HR department, all of them have to figure out what activities, what programs, procedures, what kind of budget requirements that they need to get that strategy, to make that strategy come to life. Okay, and this is where middle management sits. They are actually looking at, hey, what are the programs? What are the budgets? What are the procedures that we need to have in place? What are the companies that we need to hire and work with in order to draft the marketing strategy so that we can run our advertising campaign successfully and push toward that 12% market share increase? Okay, so strategy implementation is critical. As I stated earlier in the lecture, if you're not able to implement a strategy, it doesn't matter how great that strategy is, it still doesn't drive you to the point of success. So in this, also employee motivation, understanding how to lead becomes critical, because if you can't get your followers on board the strategy, then what good is it? And the last section here is evaluation and control. And in this section, what you're doing is you're monitoring the company's performance. I laid out this great strategy. I got my company employees, both middle management and lower level managers, they're implementing that strategy. How do I know it's being successful? Well, I need to have mechanisms in place to track that performance. How am I measuring the market share? How am I measuring the sales? How am I measuring product quality or product innovation or whatever it was that the strategy is focused on driving and creating? You have to be able to monitor your performance and do it in a way that's objective and that can be measured. Okay. Second, you have to have review sessions set up to review that progress. Right? You have to set aside time, whether quarterly, monthly, weekly, whatever is appropriate for your strategy, to review the performance. And if the performance is going the way you need it to, excellent, keep going. If the performance is not hitting the results that you expected, you need to take a close look at that strategy and then implement corrective actions. So this is where that feedback process comes, where you're learning from the strategy. And I'm going to tell you, it's fair to say that some component of every strategy is not going to work out as expected. So you have to identify it quickly, make corrective actions, and get out there and do it again. That way, you're constantly learning, and the odds of you becoming successful increase dramatically. Well, that wraps it up for this lecture. I want to thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Don't forget to study.